Good afternoon from Tokyo. Thank you for joining the Knowledge Forum titled How Will AI Change Africa? Co-hosted by JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development and the United Nations University. I'm Yukari Saito from JICA Ogata Research Institute. I will be your guide today. First, let me invite Ms. Miyahara Chie, Director General of JICA Ogata Research Institute for the opening remarks. Ms. Miyahara, please turn on your camera and over to you. Thank you very much, Saito-san. Distinguished guests, distinguished panel members, all participants, thank you for attending JICA Ogata Research Institute's Knowledge Forum on How Will AI Change Africa. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the United Nations University for co-hosting today's event. This forum will explore the potential benefits of AI in Africa. In recent years, we have witnessed rapid advances in AI technology. It is increasingly touching our lives in various fields such as healthcare, education, business, and governance. To be sure, AI brings benefits. At the same time, there are growing concerns about its risks, such as AI-generated disinformation, monopolization of technology by big tech, and misuse of personal data for AI learning. The widening of the existing digital divide between and within countries is also a concern. In light of this current situation, the international community is discussing governance frameworks of AI. The United Nations has played an important role in developing the global AI governance. In a recent landmark initiative, the UN General Assembly adopted the first ever resolution on the respect and protection of human rights in the use of AI. Japan is also taking the initiative, such as launching the Hiroshima AI Process to build up and promote inclusive global governance on AI at the G7 Hiroshima Summit in 2023. With this growing attention to mitigating the potential risks posed by AI, the Council of the EU has recently approved the world's first comprehensive AI Act. The advances in AI also have implications for Africa. As the number of young digital natives grows, so does the potential for development through AI. Today, we are joined by Professor Tshilidzi Marwala of South Africa, the Rector of the United Nations University and Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. Professor Marwala is a prominent expert on AI technology, and he will speak about the challenges and opportunities that AI technology presents for Africa's development. Following this presentation, the panelists will discuss the initiatives needed for Africa to reap the benefits of AI technology while mitigating the risks posed by rapid advances in AI. I am confident that this forum will provide a meaningful opportunity to enhance our collective understanding of the potential benefits and risks of AI for development, and to discuss the necessary actions to maximize the innovative opportunities of AI for achieving human security and quality growth in Africa. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Miyahara. Please turn off your camera now. Now, let me invite Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, Rector of the United Nations University and Under-Secretary General of the United Nations for the keynote speech. Professor Marwala, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Director General Ms. Miyahara, for the invitation, and all my fellow panelists and all the people who have joined us this afternoon here in Tokyo. I am particularly excited that I am speaking at the JICA Ogata Research Institute, because for those of us who were watching CNN in the 90s, we know that Madam Ogata was actually a symbol, a very strong symbol for human rights, for refugees, and ensuring that people are not unfairly targeted, especially refugees. And at the time in which we live in, I personally miss the leadership of Madam Ogata very, very much. Of course, the topic that has been given to me, resuscitating Africa rise, the role AI can play, is a very important issue. Just recently, as recent as 2011, the term Africa rise began to crop up. And of course, it began to crop up because we were seeing economic growth in the African continent that we had never really witnessed. It represented Africa as a hopeful continent, which is really the direct opposite of the stories that were circulating, and I'm going to point out at The Economist when I was a PhD student in the year 2000, where they were characterizing the African continent as a hopeless continent. And of course, we now know that that was not the correct characterization of the African continent. At the time of this Africa Rise peak, 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies were in Africa. The governance challenges were being addressed head on, and the middle class was expanding at an impressive rate. And of course, Africa seemed to be shaking off the stereotypes it has long been associated with. But just recently, the narrative of Africa Rise has, however, come crumbling down. Why has that been the case? I think it is due to a convergence of a number of factors that have happened in the last few years. First, climate change is a growing threat to the lives and livelihoods, and it disproportionately impacts the African continent. And the economic disruptions that are stemming from conflicts across the globe have had a knock-on effect on the growth story of the African continent. And these are conflicts that we have witnessed in Europe. We know what is happening in Europe, in the Middle East, and in the African continent itself. And the regional and the COVID-19 pandemic has had a particularly pronounced impact on the African continent. As a December 2023 Financial Times article outlined, in the last 5 years, just 3 African economies experienced an annual growth rate exceeding 6%. This was Benin, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. And of our biggest concern, there's not been any African economy that has witnessed a substantial increase in average per capita income, with half of them experiencing a decrease, including 3 of the continent's largest economies: South Africa, where I come from, Nigeria, and Algeria. And moreover, despite an increase in the workforce in Africa, we have seen the struggle to raise output per capita per worker in the African continent. As these indicators indicate, Africa seems not to be rising any longer. And we need to change that narrative. But of course, given all this, there are still some encouraging forecasts, such as the African Development Bank's recent prognosis that the continent will continue to be the second fastest growing region, and that this year an estimated 41 countries are expected to grow faster than they did last year. And as the president of the AFDB, Dr. Adesina, said at the launch of the report, Africa's future is bright, but we need to make sure we tackle governance, transparency, accountability, and management of our natural resources. We need to make sure resources are used to the benefit of the people of this continent. The kind of resilience we are talking about cannot happen unless we deal with the issue of climate change. In other words, the problems of Africa are actually quite solvable. And AI is going to be part of the solution that we need to deploy in order to see a rise in the economic growth, in the per capita income, in the productivity of an African worker. Although there are differing figures that have been bandied about, a recent PwC report warned that although the impact of AI would be profound globally, it will be lesser for Africa because of the continent's low adoption rate of technology. As the report outlines, collectively, Africa, Oceania, and some less developed Asian markets will see $1.2 trillion or 5.6% of the GDP growth by 2030, a fraction compared to other regions. As this indicates, the continent is simply not adapting fast enough to the age of AI. The implications of this for economic stability on the continent are dire. Beyond these figures and the promise of growth, which can often seem daunting and disjointed from reality, it is important to consider some of the tangible possibilities AI presents. AI innovation has the potential to drive sustainable solutions on the continent. These solutions could tackle some of the region's insecurities and improve service delivery, as just two examples. For instance, precision agriculture can optimize farming practices, tackling issues of food insecurity, while AI-driven fintech solutions could expand financial inclusion. Elsewhere, telemedicine and predictive analytics could enhance healthcare accessibility. AI in education could bridge the gaps in learning and increase access to education, because Africa simply does not have the time and the space to build the brick and mortar institutions that we require. So the use of IT in general and AI in particular to expand education provision is absolutely necessary for us to be able to take care of these bulging numbers of young people, which has become the largest number of young people in the world. The promise of this is all the more exciting when you consider Africa's increasingly young and growing population. As the examples I have given demonstrate, AI could be the key to a more sustainable and inclusive future, particularly cognizant of the unique challenges in Africa. I am reminded of the words of Lorenzo Fioramonti, who said in 2017 of the Africa Rise in narrative, a new approach to progress is desperately needed, one that is able to marry human and ecological well-being. AI could be this very approach. Yet, as history has demonstrated, if Africa has any hope in succeeding in this endeavor, then solutions must emerge from within the continent. Africa needs to write its own story. This is an often repeated refrain, but it rings true. We have to acknowledge that we cannot simply import technology and hope for the best. This is certainly not what I mean by a silver bullet. Rather, we have to adapt AI to our own context. This is, of course, easier said than done. In cases where adaptation is not an option, then we need to formulate our own versions of the algorithms that form the basis of this technology. These visions hinges on our education system. It is thus imperative that we encourage people to study AI at every level. And of course, when I talk about studying AI, I don't mean the people who are studying computer science. We need to make AI literacy compulsory for all students in all universities. When I was a vice chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, one of the innovations that we introduced was to make artificial intelligence literacy course compulsory for all the students, irrespective of what they were studying. And this is important because AI, which for a very long time was a technical subject, is becoming a human subject because it is in our hospitals, it is in our transportation, it should be in our education system, it is in our environments. When we are dealing with issues of climate change, the role of AI to deal with issues of climate change cannot be emphasized enough. As the United Nations University we just hosted in Bonn, just this month, the first conference in Germany that deals with the issue of artificial intelligence and its impact on climate change. This obviously requires multidisciplinary education. Of course, for us to be able to grow the seeds, to be able to see all this happening, this requires significant improvement in STEM education and vocational training. There has to be a concerted effort for us to collect our own data so that we are able to build relevant AI systems. Part of the reason that AI exhibits bias towards Africans more than other groups is because of lack of representative data. Our policies also need to be reframed in a manner that speaks to these advancements, but also speaks to our ethical approach, the one that takes the African perspective into account. While AI certainly enables new technologies that improve efficiency and productivity, it may also lead to increased inequalities among and within countries. Gaps in transparency, accountability, safety, and ethical standards could hinder the development and sustainability of AI in Africa. AI policies and strategies need to speak to all these possibilities. A recent Brookings report outlines that the challenges posed by AI have to be addressed alongside enacting AI regulation to both preempt any potential harm and hold AI practitioners accountable. What is required is regional collaboration to ensure that policy is harmonized and based on inclusivity and best practices. Beyond policy consideration, we need to create an enabling environment for open data to boost African AI exchange. Then there needs to be greater investment into AI on the continent. This calls for a focus on AI centers that focus on localized applications of AI. There are examples of this already in Rwanda and South Africa. Solid investments in these kinds of facilities related to research is pivotal to creating an AI-driven economy. We must also be mindful of what we already have. Though there are glaring infrastructure gaps, we have to work around the current systems in place. There is thus a need to build AI-specific infrastructure which integrates with existing economic and social infrastructure. While these solutions should come from the continent, this is not to say that we can achieve all this alone, and therefore the need for partnerships. For instance, computational infrastructure that processes and stores data is required, which can be bought from companies such as Amazon and Microsoft, but still be adapted to our own African context. Though we can lean on other nations and companies from other regions for support and guidance, we cannot stall in the hope that we will be helped. If we are to take advantage of the opportunities AI presents, we have to build our own models that ensure that we are not only left behind, but we are also leading the charge. In 2013, the Rwandan President Paul Kagame declared at Davos, the major problem is that Africa's story is written from somewhere else and not by Africans themselves. That is why the rest of the world looks at Africa and wants to define it. They want to shape the perception about Africa. The best we can do for ourselves is to own our problems, own our solutions, and write our stories. That will also give us the right definition about the level of risks, real risks, and the perception part of it will also be put in its right place. Although reports seem to indicate that Africa is falling woefully behind, we are certainly moving in the right direction. There have been some encouraging developments. Namibia, South Africa, Rwanda, Mauritius, and Kenya are among countries that already have national AI blueprints, and these blueprints must be translated into concrete actions. Excitingly, in February, the African Union Development Agency released an AI policy draft. This came in tandem with the European Union's announcement of its AI Act. The AU's policy, which is expected to be endorsed in 2025, focuses on policy coordination, capacity building, the establishment of an advisory committee, resource mobilization, and stakeholder engagement. It is envisioned that this policy will guide AU members that do not have their own national strategies. AU members with AI strategies will be encouraged to align with the AU's policies. Importantly, as the Brookings report suggests, countries still need to acknowledge country-specific consideration in this process. Of course, putting policy into place is not enough. We need to ensure that the challenges I have alluded to are suitably addressed and that we forge ahead with actioning our blueprints. We cannot succeed in the age of AI without implementation. This is a task that cannot wait if Africa is to rise once again. Now, in summary, what needs to be done? I think there are 4 elements that we need to take into account. Is the issue of data? Is the issue of algorithms? Is the issue of computing? And is the issues of applications of AI technology? And the United Nations is actually coming up with an international governance framework to regulate AI. and is really about regulating data, algorithms, computing, and applications. And in order for this regulation to work, we need to have values that define AI. The values of inclusivity, the values of fairness, the values of access, the values that include truth. Truth is very, very important because algorithmic truth is not necessarily guaranteed, you know. And then the second thing that we need to do is to change the behavior of people. These are people who are developing this technology. These are people who are using this technology, and education is at the core of changing the behavior of people. The third thing that we need to do is to develop mechanisms of incentives and disincentives. Companies must be incentivized to adopt these technologies. I'm not going to prescribe what incentives are. It can be tax breaks when you adopt these technologies. And fourthly, we need policies. We need policies that are going to guide us. And furthermore, we need standards. We need standards that are going to ensure that the deployment of this technology is done in the right way. And we need regulations so that those who do not want to adhere to the values and the standards and the policies are appropriately disincentivized. And finally, we need laws. It means when we go to the African continent, we need to find mechanisms of training African leaders to be able to craft technology-related laws, a capacity that should not be taken for granted. And it's not just a problem of the global South. It is also the problem of the global North. I've just been informed that my time is about to run out. And I'm going to conclude by uttering the words that were said in the 1960s by Kwame Nkrumah, who once prophesied, and I quote, "A decade ago, this would have been visionary words, the fantasies of an ideal dreamer. But this is the age in which science has transcended the limits of the material world, and technology has invaded the silences of nature." And this is as relevant today as it was relevant then. In conclusion, we need to build infrastructure. We need to strengthen our education system. We need to develop policies. We need to create incentives. And we need to make Africa rise again. And as Kwame Nkrumah said, forward ever, backward never. Arigato gozaimashita.
Thank you very much, Professor Marwala. And please turn off your camera now. Next, let's move on to the panel discussion. Let me introduce our three panelists today. Dear panelists, when I call your name and introduce you to the floor, please turn on your camera. So Professor Sirizi Marwala, Rector of the United Nations University and Undersecretary General of the United Nations. And Professor Mine Yoichi, Executive Director of JICA Ogata Research Institute. And Mr. Yamanaka Atsushi, Senior Advisor of Digital Transformation of JICA. And our moderator today will be Ms. Miyahara Chie, Director General, JICA Ogata Research Institute. After the presentations and discussion by the panelists, we will pick up some of the questions from the floor and directly move on to the Q&A session. So during the discussion, please send your questions to the panelists with Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom. Now, let us start. Ms. Miyahara, please turn on your camera and over to you.
Thank you very much, Saito-san, and thank you very much for Professor Maruwara for very inspiring and strong presentations to Rise Africa. And now we would like to move on to the panel discussions. Thank you very much for Professor Mine and Mr. Yamanaka to be with me for these discussions. So first of all, I would like to ask the two panelists about your reactions or your thoughts or comments or sometimes questions you would like to share with Professor Maruwara. So now can I ask Professor Mine first to make his comments? Thank you.
Okay, you hear me? Oh, thank you so much, Professor Maruwara, for such a powerfully fascinating speech. So before my colleague Yamanaka-san is giving comments and from the DX perspective, let me react as director of this institute and also as specialist of African studies. So your speech reminded me of the eloquent vision of Kwame Nkrumah and also cool calculation of William Arthur Lewis. So it's very much impressive. And you referring to the discourse given by Paul Kagame and Kwame Nkrumah, you emphasized the African ownership. So it's quite impressive. And but at the same time, so I'd like to draw your attention to the notion of ownership and partnership. So this dual notion was presented first at the time of the TICAD, first TICAD in 1993. So the Africans emphasize African agency and ownership, and we then talk about partnership and solidarity. So I think we talk now less about this ownership and partnership duality, but I think we talk less because I think it is now accepted norm. So we take it as granted. So so keeping this principle in mind, let me say I'm actually quite optimistic about African future. So this is because of my own experience as a teacher. So in the past 3 decades, I have supervised master thesis and PhD dissertations written by African students. So of course, many different kinds of students. People are diverse. But let me say, on average, African students, their performance is better than average Japanese students. So in terms of the, kind of dynamic, inquisitive mind and curiosity, and also creativity, innovative mind, and also the communication skills. So many African students are quite dynamic. And then also they study their own subject here in Japan, but surprisingly, they just strengthen their, psychological tie as Africans. So away from Africa, they just cultivate some kind of Pan-African, unity in Japan. So I think it was a kind of unintended welcome consequence of this brain circulation. So I want to suggest, especially to the Japanese policymakers and also the business leaders, to accept more African young people. So to the graduate level and also postdoctoral level, and as young scholars, and also as company employees, so in natural and also social science field. So you talked about precision agriculture and fintech and health and education. So these natural science field, many African young students show quite a strong, robust talents. So I really suggest the Japanese policymakers should just keep them for a while. Of course, it depends on decisions, but keep them for the moment in Japan, and maybe they can send those African young employees or students to Africa as part of the Japanese academic and business missions. So I think we are now entering this kind of maturity of the relationship of the some scholarship and brain circulation programs the JICA and MEXT have provided. So, of course, in the case of the JICAs, we may, assist the construction of data center, for example. But not only this kind of infrastructure, but also if we talk about human resource development and this collaboration, I'm quite optimistic about the, quite a massive, presence of African talented youth. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mine. There's a comments from the African specialist and his future look about the brighter future for the youth of African, for the youth from African continent. Thank you. And now I would like to turn on Mr. Yamanaka about your reactions or questions to the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the occasions, and thank you, Professor Maruara, for such a powerful and inspiring speech and then the presentations, which actually talks about the bright African future. And I also second Professor Mine as well. For the last 14 years, I've been mostly working in Africa, especially in Rwanda. And I also taught quite many of the African students through our initiatives in one of the graduate schools, which I teach. And I really second Professor Mine's comment about the talent, the pool of talent that you have in the continent. It's quite amazing. I can give you one example. For example, one was a student we sent from Rwanda. She studied actually in the master's degree first, but he went on to study on the PhD on AI. And he actually got the first year of the AI, he didn't get the scholarship. So he actually got the money from his families, and then he continued second year onward, he got a PhD on AI. He actually became a researcher at RIKEN on AI, African Large Language Model. Unfortunately for Japan, fortunately for Africa, he actually went to Princeton afterwards, but hopefully with a brain circulation like that, we should also benefit from there as well. So I've seen it for the first hand, how the African talent is actually cultivated in Japan, actually blossoming into, the global stage, and then going back to Africa to, help this African development. And also, since I was working in Rwanda, I've seen a lot of young talent, especially in the startup scenes, that they actually are working very hard in the technology-oriented startups. And then where I really see Africa as a next sort of innovation cradle, because there are so many needs in Africa, where we do not see it here in the so-called developed countries. With these young people, and then also old people as well, they see a lot of needs, and they come up with innovative solutions, and that's actually is actually helping, developed countries as well. So, for example, mobile money, it's a cradle. It's people do not realize this mobile money actually came from Africa. We didn't invent this. And that's kind of a lot of innovative solutions I think will come from Africa. I firmly believe in that. And the AI is also another possibilities on that. I have actually a lot more questions I would like to ask you, but since let's actually, guys tend to speak so much, but let's actually continue our discussions. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Yamanaka-san. Actually, we have a lot of time, so maybe after the first round, we can go to the second and third round. But before going to the second round, Professor Maruara, do you have any reactions or some comments which was posed by Professor Mine and Mr. Yamanaka?
No, absolutely. No, thank you very much, Professor Mine and Professor Yamanaka, for those very important interventions. Just on Professor Mine, I think the idea of exchange of people is very important. When I was a young man and I was thinking about studying outside South Africa, I was only presented with the United Kingdom and United States, you know. And I think if you go to many parts of certainly South Africa, where I come from, we have thousands and thousands of people who studied in United States and UK, and that's important because we need to get ideas from elsewhere. But I think we missed out on Asia. I think we did. I always say the Abe Scholarship, to me, is the equivalent of the Fulbright Scholarship that the Americans introduced in the 60s after the famous senator Fulbright. And I've seen what the Abe Scholarship has done. I'll just give you two examples. I met the gentleman who is now in Princeton. I did. I'm going to show you the picture. One of our students that we sent to Japan, Ndibu, came here, did a PhD in robotics at Tokyo Institute of Technology. He's a prominent IBM engineer in Johannesburg. In Johannesburg, not in the United States. IBM is an American company, but in Johannesburg, working on exciting topics such as quantum computing. Joshua Maumera, who studied at Waseda University, is now working for the second, I don't know, there's the second or the largest telecommunication company in the African continent, Vodacom, you know. And in many ways, it's a win-win strategy. Because I can see that these are not the same people that we sent to Japan. They're better people, you know, with views that we would not traditionally have in our system. So these are very important issues. And we need to expand people's collaboration. We also need to expand the topics that the students actually come and study here. Coming to Professor Yamanaka. I mean, actually, the idea of partnership, ownership, partnership, and solidarity. It's a powerful concept. It's powerful not just for the African continent, it's powerful. I'm here with the Senior Vice Rector of United Nations University, also for United Nations, that in our work, we need to partner, we need to create ownership, and ultimately we must have solidarity in tackling some of the problems that are common to all of us, climate change and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We touched upon the collaboration, cooperation, and brain circulation for the capacity development in technology and AI, the first cycle. So I would like to ask Mr. Professor Mine, I think you have more things you would like to raise on this discussion. So I would like to give the floor to you.
Okay. Thank you, Miyahara-san. I have actually many more questions, but maybe, okay, but let me choose one. It's about AI, but about the necessity of regulation. Of course, the privacy is important, but at the same time, we witness the wars in Europe and the Middle East, and the military make most use of the AI technology to pinpoint a target and make the operations as efficient as possible. So today's theme is Africa. So even Russians fighting in Africa, And also there is also some successful peacekeeping operations of the African Union and regional organizations level. But anyway, so military is quite inevitable, some aspect of the African way of life, the political life. So, but especially when the soldiers have some military operation in foreign land, they heavily depend on the AI technology, the efficient operations. So, but at the same time, it is very, very scary. And also is not accountable, not very democratic regimes often sometimes, make some, try to make the most use of this such technology. So, but the people are quite concerned about this something, happening without your reach. So your decision is not, is considered, is not part of the decision making. So what I want to say is maybe African Union level, there is Agenda 2063, but there is not specific mention about AI in the original document. So how do you think about this? As kind of maybe establishing special commission at the African Union level, and especially the military peace and AI. This must be, is a quite important area or constellation. Yeah, and also just one thing. Also I think that we have to humanize AI, and humanizing AI. This agenda should come from Africa. So the security should be people-centered. So maybe I think the human security agenda can be part of this, new thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that very complicated and difficult question. I mean, I think the big issue is, do we need to regulate AI? And the answer is yes. The second issue that we need to answer is, who should regulate AI? I think AI must be regulated at 4 levels. I think it has to be regulated at the international level. I think it has to be regulated at the regional level, such as the African Union or the European Union. We know about the AI Act in Europe that has just been adopted. I think it needs to be regulated at the national level. And I think industry must also regulate it, because we can regulate data at the international, regional, and local level, but we can't really regulate algorithms. How do you regulate how you choose whether to use multi-layer perceptron or radial basis function? It should be done at industry level. So this is quite important. The Secretary General has a high-level advisory body on AI that is going to recommend and ultimately is going to go to the pact of the future. And when we regulate, what are the objectives? What are we trying to do? I think we are trying to do 2 things. Firstly, we want to maximize the benefits of AI. And secondly, we want to minimize the risks. And these 2, actually, you will always have both of them. You will have countries that are much more risk averse. So they are going to be much more worried about the risks. You are going to have countries that are much more opportunity focused, who will have less regulation and much more industry. And really, it's the value of each country. That is the objective. Now, what are the big critical issues that we need to worry about when we regulate? I'm only going to talk about the safety problem. Professor Mine, you are talking about the safety problem. How do we make this technology safe? And when we make this technology safe, are they trade-offs? Can we make it less safe so that, can a company make it less safe so that they can maximize profit? Should we allow that? Can we allow an AI algorithm that is used in medical diagnostics, which we know is not safe? It's not 100% safe. Maybe it is 90% safe. Should we allow it to go into the market? It's the safety problem. The second one is the balancing problem. The balancing problem is that once you make a choice that we want to make AI transparent, it becomes less accurate. Once you make it less accurate, it is transparent. So that trade-off you need to understand. You're going to balance, and there's no prescription on what, and then you have issues of truth versus accuracy. Accuracy does not mean truth. Truth requires accuracy, but accuracy is not truth. The balancing problem is important. And we are preparing for the, for the Summit of the Future. And as I've already indicated, we need to regulate data, we need to regulate algorithm, we need to regulate computing, we need to regulate applications. One critical element of data is the issue of cross-border data flow. And Prime Minister Abe, in the 2019 G7 meeting, introduced something called DIFFT. And I think the T is the important part. Everybody knows that data must be shared. We know from COVID that if we had shared the data, COVID would not have been as damaging as it was. Is the issue of safety. That we know that climate data must be shared, but people don't want to share it because they say it undermines their economic competitiveness. We come from the African continent where we have a river that is shared by 11 countries. Source of conflict, potential conflict, the Nile River, which starts in Uganda and ends in Egypt. It crosses the 11 countries. Can you believe it? And it is clear that each and every country there must know what is happening to that river, because it has implications downstream. If you are at the beginning of the river, you're better off. If you're at the end, whatever all these other countries have done, you bear the consequences. So data sharing is important. But Prime Minister Abe said, but we need to ensure that it is trustworthy. Trustworthy means we must be sure that it does not carry viruses. We must be sure that there are no cyber weapons that are hidden in it. And I'm hoping that the Global Digital Compact is going to deal with that issue. Now, on the safety issue, there's the issue of the militarization of AI. Basically, there are three philosophies that guide the implementation of AI in the military. The first one is human in the loop, which is what Professor Mine was talking about. Which basically means the AI system cannot take a decision unless a human being says, yes, you can take a decision now. The second one is human on the loop. We are used to human on the loop because this is what pilots in aircrafts do. Most of the time they are sitting, drinking coffee, and so on and so forth. And the automated system is actually taking all the decisions, but they have to be observant and see what is happening. And if something happens, then they can intervene. And we know about 747 MAX in Ethiopia. The plane crash of Boeing 747 MAX. That it was because the human who was on the loop couldn't control because there was some fault in the control system. So you need a human on the loop in the pilot system. You can't say the airplane is going to go, no need for a pilot. It's just passengers and the plane. That will not be acceptable. And then the last one, which I don't agree with, is human out of the loop. I think for lethal autonomous weapons, a human being must always be on the loop. Can't be out of the loop. So that is quite important, but the question is, going back to the governance issues, who is going to give that policy? I think there's an element of international law. I think there is an element of regional law. In Africa, in the African Union, we have a project called Silencing the Guns. I think they need to play a role, and I think the nation state, the nations are going to do that. And if we do all these things, Professor Mine, then we humanize AI, which is actually quite a critical issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Maruara. We came into the very serious part of the AI in Africa from the meter use of AI and also regulation of AI, politics, and that kind of things. And I think that as an expert of AI and IT systems, I think Yamanaka-san may have some questions or some kind of adding point of discussions.
Thank you so much. Actually, thank you, Miyashita-san, Mihara-san, sorry. Professor Marwa, since we're talking about the governance, can I actually add on to the governance? You have actually answered part of my questions I already formulated, but let's talk about the governance issues. I think governance is much more complex. Technology is easy. It's we can adapt technology, but the governance is always a problem. We understand, yes, the need for international, regional, and national, and also the industrial actual regulations or the policies in terms of AI governance. In the Global Digital Compact as well, there's a lot of mentions about AI. However, it's very, very difficult at international levels to, basically come up with the framework. You mentioned about the FFT. That also has been very contentious. The first actually draft of the Digital Compact actually had the DFFT, but now it's gone. There is actually data flow, but the word DFFT is gone now on the first draft and the second draft. So it's been quite controversial. You talk about the data is essential for the African development. I completely agree with you, especially in the AFTA context, African Free Trade Agreement. If you cannot actually have the data transferred, transacted freely, securely, and trustworthy, Africa will not become a one, economy or one market. So it's essential. However, many countries in Africa and also elsewhere as well, they are very afraid of actually having data to go outside of their borders. Of course, it's partly, I think, because of it's a bitter experience of GDPR, including now it's data transactions, also AI. It's so-called, developed countries, OECD countries, or EU is setting the standard. And a lot of developing countries actually have to follow that, right? Including Africa as well. Even if EU actually enacted the Africa, the AI policies, they have to abide by the GDPR, the EU's AI Act or OECD's AI Act. How can we actually put the inputs or the voices from Africa and also other developing countries into this global governance framework, especially in AI, data transfer, data sovereignties, all these things? Because without that key element, I think it's going to be very difficult for the developing countries and Africa to capitalize the AI technologies. So, yeah, I challenge you. How can I do this?
No. Thank you very much. And by the way, what I am seeing now is that it's no longer just the division between the global north and the global south. It is becoming the division between the AI haves and the AI have-nots. And the reason is very simple. The reason is because the AI technology is primarily developed in two countries. In fact, somebody was telling me that over 90% of all research into AI are in United States and China. And they are not 90% of the global population, but they actually are investing 90% of the resources. At the General Assembly, I don't know whether you saw that, the US government actually brought in a framework, a policy proposal that was adopted by the General Assembly of the UN on AI governance. A few months later, China also sent its own a thing to the General Assembly, which was adopted, I think, a few weeks back. I don't understand what it means. Two different proposals being endorsed, I think, is by the General Assembly. So the voices that needs to be heard are much broader than just the African voices. They are voices of other global south. They are voices of other countries, many countries in the global north that are just spectators in the development of this technology. They are just users and so on and so forth. Now, the question, coming to your question, how do we make these voices that are not being heard to be heard? I think that is where the UN system actually comes into the picture. If you look at the 39-member committee, a high-level advisory body on AI of the Secretary General, it represents all countries. There are 2 people from Japan. There are people from South Africa. There are people from Rwanda. There are people from the United States, from Europe, and so on and so forth. We need to make those voices heard. But the problem is that much of the people who are supposed to hear this are actually developers. They are actually the people in Silicon Valley and the Chinese version of it. And that is where we need to think about how do we bring the ideas that I talked about, the values of AI, into those spaces. I think we need to start thinking about how to insert AI into education systems so that the people who go and develop these technologies already understand the global nature of this technology. Difficult than actually done. I think the regional bodies must have a stronger view. The African Union has a much stronger voice than individual countries. The European Union already has a big voice. That is why you see tech people going to the European Union to account sometimes. And I think Asia is another site where we're interested to see what is going to happen. The G7 is also another body that, of course, you have one big player there in the G7, but the other countries can express their voices there. So and I was speaking at the G7 ministerial meeting in Bologna, and AI was one of the topics that, and its governance was one of the topics that the G7 is taking forward. Thank you. I see there are questions on the internet.
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe we have been discussing about the governance issues and data flows and that kind of international framework of how we can develop the AI system in Africa. But some of the question is coming from the floor. I would like to take one at this moment, if it is okay with Mr. Professor Mine and Yamanaka-san. So one of them, I would like to take one question from the floor that I appreciate Professor Maruwara's thoughts on the importance of humanistic value, for example, inclusiveness, fairness, access, truth, in creating a framework for regulating AI technology. And I'm happy to hear that the UN is currently working on such a framework. My question is, how do you expect a UN proposal to be carefully taken up by different governments in Africa and elsewhere, and other organizations and individuals that are in the position to enact such a policy?
No, thank you very much for that very difficult question, I must confess, but a very important one. How do we ensure that whatever happens at the UN level actually ends up being implemented? I mean, I'll be a little bit controversial here. I think we need to simplify our message as the UN system. I mean, for example, we have the Global Digital Compact. It's actually a difficult word for an ordinary person to understand. It's difficult for professors to understand. It's difficult for professors of English to understand from England. So you can imagine what happens to people who don't even speak the language. No, I think we need to simplify the message. Secondly, and this is part of what we are doing as the United Nations, here in Japan, by visiting all the 47 prefectures, me and Senior Vice Rector, we need to take the United Nations and its messages to the people. Because United Nations belongs to the people. It's an organization of the people. Of course, they are represented by their governments, but we should never forget about the people. So every little opportunity to address even a school is very important. I went to all the way to Karyuzawa to address high school students. And it's very important to address high school students. We want to bring more people to come to Japan, more events to come to Japan, more UN leaders to come to Japan. And one of the things that I want them to do is actually to go to primary schools and just talk about what they are doing. Because once you go to primary schools, you are shaping the future. I think that's very important. Second, we need to take this message to the people. And thirdly, we need to find ways in which we balance self-interest and global interest. Because some of these things, they just never get done because country X thinks that their economic interests are going to be undermined. AI and climate, all our interests are undermined if it results with temperatures that we have never witnessed before. I was hearing that this year here in Tokyo we're going to see temperatures that we have never witnessed before. And that story repeats itself. You go to Johannesburg, you go to Sao Paulo, they are telling you, we have never seen these temperatures before. And I think it's all up to us. And finally, it's really about getting policymakers who understand technology. We were in Addis, our institute in New York, United Nations CPR, was in Addis with the co-facilitators of the Global Digital Compact, Zambia and Sweden, just to take a deep dive on what it means, what the concept of data means for the African continent. We need to do more. We need to go to Latin America. We need to come to Japan. We need to go to, we were in Singapore, and so on and so forth. Very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Maruara. And several questions which we received before this seminar, they are asking some kind of concrete example of how AI is really solving the problems if it's existing in Africa. For example, what do you think that AI can contribute to strengthening public health in Africa? We would be happy to hear about some of the specific examples which are currently working on. So do you have any good example we can share?
Absolutely. I'll give you one example. I had a student a few years ago called Vukosi Mariwat. He has obviously become a very important student, an AI expert. And he has done quite important issue. The first one is the so-called Deep Indaba initiative. I don't know whether you know it, where they go to about 35 African countries to teach about AI. Of course, they are very well funded by the usual big tech, and they are able to get all these big thinkers to Africa. I don't know how, but they do. And I'm going to refer you to their website to see what they do. And that is changing people's mindset on AI. The second one, which was also done by the same person, is a project called Masakane. Masakane is a project that is aimed at digitizing African languages. And the first way to digitize is actually to record it. And the outcome of that is that finally my mother tongue is in Google Translate. So if you go to my village and you want to communicate, you can communicate using Google Translate. It did not exist last year. And thanks to the project of Masakan. At first, it was just gathering the language. Of course, this is written text. The next step is spoken text so that we can be able to interact with languages. And the issue of languages in Africa is complex. 2,000 languages are just too expensive to maintain. Big languages are fine. So that's a good example. And thirdly, if you go to South African banking system, I used to be a director of one of the biggest banks in South Africa. And you go there and you see, and of course the banking system in South Africa is one of the best. I think at one stage it was in the top 5 according to the World Economic Forum. It's actually quite impressive, and how AI is able to simplify the use for my mother in the village. Very important. And I'm not going to go into a farmer who now does not need an inspector to come and tell them what they need to do. When I was growing up, used to have these people, they will come, they wear very nice jackets, and they just advise small-scale farmers on what needs to be done. And I'm a farmer in South Africa, by the way. I know the importance of that. Even the most sophisticated of educated, I literally am at loss. I did not know something called heavy water that kills goats. I did not know about some of the poisonous plants. Now I can be able to go to some app and it will be able to tell me what this plant is. And I can be able to go and check whether that plant is poisonous or not. And if it is poisonous, I can be able to remove it from my farm. That is some of the examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very concrete example of how AI can solving some problems in Africa. So Yonaka-san, you're raising hand. Okay.
Wanted to ask so many questions. So, Professor Marwa, you talked about Google actually providing that kind of services, different language models. So I would like to actually ask you questions about You mentioned in your speech about importance of contextualizing and also having a regional or the local sort of algorithms.
Right.
Yes. We are actually currently formulating AI sort of framework within JICA. How can I actually utilize AI? And one of the questions which came up is, shall we actually encourage creations of local language models and the local sort of AI algorithm and so on, versus if we do this, or industry specific AI models, if we do this, isn't it just sort of benefiting the generic AI models because they are learning from this language, they're learning from these algorithms, and they would incorporate and then just benefiting from them. So whether shall we actually continue to actually do that localized path, the contextualizing, or can we actually prevent, or can we actually come up with some kind of business models to make sure that kind of localized model would thrive and survive, basically, and thrive with, and then not to be sort of a feedstock for generic AI. That's question number one. And question number two is about the localized infrastructures. This is also another issue that we are struggling what to do with it. As you know, the power consumptions of the data center is going to be huge. Some estimates saying that by 2030s, the data center globally would actually consume the same powers as Germany. And that's a huge amount of power that needs to be consumed. And then, I think by 2030, I think it's 160% of this data centers electricity consumption is coming from the AI. So the AI is going to be the huge part of the data centers. Does that actually allow? I mean, Africa is having issues with power, and also the waters and so on. Would it make sense actually to concentrating on creating localized ICT or the AI infrastructures versus can we sort of balancing this, and then if it's like heavy calculations, maybe we can use like facility in Japan, for example, we have supercomputers. And then of course, if it's localized and the latest is everything, but at the same time, should we really concentrating on that, or should we actually come up with sort of consortium or the partnership models so we could really consolidate computing powers globally?
No, thank you very much. I think on the first one, on local models, especially large language models, I went to give a talk at Tohoku University. And when I was talking to the president of Tohoku University at the time, who is an expert on semiconductors, he told me that they have a project of creating large language models for Japanese. For Japanese. And he says, but we have a problem. He says the problem is that Japanese is only 2% of the contents in the internet compared to 55% English. And by definition, it means large language models in English are going to perform better than large language models in Japanese, because you just have too much data in English compared to Japanese. And by the way, Japanese is 2%. That's huge. Many languages don't even make it to 1%. I mean, you can imagine there are more than 100 languages in the world. In Africa, there's 2,000. They don't even make it to that. So I think what needs to be created while we are creating our own large language models, we need to also be creating interfaces with English, because most of the archives are in English. Interfaces, the combination of interfaces and specific large language models. Wherever the data is not available, you will have to translate, On the second issue, localized infrastructure, I think you need to have localized infrastructure. I'll give you an example. Computing. There are three things that we need to balance in computing. You have something called embedded computing, which is computing that is actually at the device that you are using. Normally, it's not as powerful. The second one is edge computing. Edge computing is that everything is in your computer. For example, when you do spell check and grammar check, whether it is Grammarly or, it's not happening somewhere in the cloud. It happens here on your computer. And because of that, it is fast. Now, the third part is cloud computing. Cloud computing, maybe in the future, it is going to be better. When I get into a flight, I struggle to use my computer. Why? Because it keeps on trying to save my document on the cloud, which I don't have access to. I'm sure I'm not the only person that actually struggles with this. And I'm like, why did they have to put my database on the cloud? I don't know whether you struggle with it. I still don't know how to switch off it trying to save things onto the cloud, And when you come to computing, and we were running a project in South Africa, has excellent high performance computing. What we found is that there will always be certain jobs that will have to go to Amazon Web Services and buy the cloud. But if that cloud is in Cape Town, your computations are much, much more efficient than if your clouds are in San Francisco. So coming closer to where the action is very important. Now, when we go to specific applications, if it is a medical application, maybe response time becomes important and you need to use edge. When it comes to issues of decision makings in conflict situations, I think it has to be at the edge, and some of it must be embedded. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's again a very complicated matter for the development of AI. Anyway, we have 2 minutes left, and maybe Professor Mini, if you have any last comments for this.
Okay, so I'm not very sure, but just for provocation, maybe. In South Africa, there's a school of pedagogists. They encourage teaching in vernacular home language like Venda in primary school. And then later gradually introduce English teaching, It's like this. And I think there can be one way of thinking, maybe not necessarily AI at the primary school level, but of course promoting logical thinking, mathematics, but AI itself, maybe, gradually later. So how do you think about this stage?
No, I like it. I mean, thank you very much for mentioning Venda. It's a very nice language. I mean, when I think of mathematical concept, I think in Venda, because that is how they were introduced. Wow, so and of course, with AI, you can make mother tongue teachings very, very accessible. So I completely support that idea of using AI to be able to bring education to people in their own home language. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Maruwara. I think our discussion is very interesting. I would like to continue another hour for this, but unfortunately, we have come too close to our time frame. So shall I give the floor back to Saito-san? Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for wonderful discussion. So please turn off your camera now. Now, let me invite Professor Shirahase Sawako, Senior Vice Rector of the United Nations University and Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, for the closing remarks. Professor Shirahase, please turn on your camera, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all. On behalf of the United Nations University, I'd like to extend our gratitude to the JICA Ogata Research Institute for co-hosting this significant, very enjoyable event with us. And first of all, I very much enjoy discussions, exchanging ideas between the panelists. Very much provocative. I learned quite a bit. Today's remarks have made us reassured how complex and challenging the issues faced by Africa can be shared with us. In recent years, climate change, regional instability, global conflicts, and the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have worsened many of the continent's crises and become obstacle to the economic growth that was once expected. With Africa projected to be home to a quarter of the world population by 2050, our global responsibility to help address these issues cannot be overstated. Africa is in dire need of sustainable solutions to these problems, and AI has tremendous potential to meet those needs. But at the same time, there are two-sided issues behind them. Today, we have discussed some of the ways in which AI can be harnessed to tackle many of these challenges, including by driving sustainable development, addressing food security, revolutionizing healthcare, improving financial inclusion, and bridging learning gaps in education. However, for this potential to be realized, effort must be made to ensure that Africa can keep up with the fast-paced global development in AI and fully harness its capabilities. A common theme in our discussions have been the need to improve access to education relevant to AI, particularly in the STEM field, to provide young Africans with the skills needed to excel in the AI era and foster a greater number of AI innovators on the African continent. We have also heard about the importance of understanding and mitigating the risks associated with AI, from job displacement, of cyber warfare, and the spread of misinformation. AI's tremendous potential comes with several dangers, and Africa is particularly vulnerable to many of these risks. As Rector Marijuana touched briefly or talked a lot about the lack of representative data also means that Africa are more likely to be subjected to bias and discrimination in all AI systems. Our discussions today have reminded us that the key to managing the risks associated with AI is through strong governance frameworks. Relevant policies and regulations are essential for ensuring that AI is harnessed ethically and sustainably. Africa, in particular, needs harmonized, inclusive AI policies that address transparency, accountability, and ethical considerations. But at the same time, we are very much difficult to find just only single solution, the best balance among them. However, as global AI governance has largely been led by the global north, African voices and their perspectives have not received sufficient attention. As a result, these frameworks are not tailored to the African context or needs of the African continent. This is why frameworks and solutions developed within Africa are so important we have to share. The recent AI policy draft by the African Union Development Agency is a promising step in this direction, and we are hopefully that it will help guide member states and align national strategies with the continental vision. It has also been encouraging to hear that many African countries have begun to introduce AI regulations into their national laws. As we close today's forum on how will AI change Africa, it is important to remember that both the significant potential of the African continent and also the elsewhere and many challenges it faces are of international common concern. As the new era of AI shapes the world, it is crucial that we ensure emerging technologies are used in an ethical and sustainable manner that leaves no one behind. I hope that all of the today's discussions attendants will take something from this event, today's event actually, and continue to foster international dialogue on the use of AI in Africa. I myself learned quite a bit. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shirahase. Now, we would like to wrap up today's seminar. All the speakers today, please turn on your camera once again. To all the participants, thank you very much for joining today's seminar. We sincerely hope that the seminar has helped to enhance your understanding on AI for development in Africa. Thank you again and have a nice day.